Hi, this is Karina and Nate, and we're going to be talking about the genetics of spider behavior.
Okay, so firstly, it is important to explain what we mean by animal behavior. In this context, we are considering behavioral traits commonly exhibited amongst an entire species across different populations that are inherent. These are behavioral traits, which are different than phylogenetic traits. So we're considering learned skills and abilities. This has nothing to do with their shape, size, or color. And then in some of the spider species we discussed, they're independent species from larvae, meaning that this is a behavior that was not taught to them by a parental figure. It was genetically encoded for them to adapt this behavior. And then, however, in some spider species, and we've seen in like some research that it might be related to spider species further north. They will choose to be communal even though they're an independent species. And we'll discuss how this adaptive behavior benefits the species.
Present-day ecological and genetic researchers recognize that many animal species have highly consistent responses to various forms of stimulation, and that is indicative of individual personality variation. Furthermore, recent findings have indicated that polymorphic behavioral strategies make various species, in this case spiders, a better fit within their environment. Certain species of spider exhibit this individual behavior variation, and these differences include actions regarding competitiveness, predator defense, mating preferences, and communal roles in social species.
All right, and some examples of the genetically inherited behavior that we're talking about. One could be communal web building. So cooperation of spiders in groups allows them to capture and process larger prey items and reduce the amount of energy invested in doing so. A specific example would be in the species Philopanella republicana. These spiders will live in semi-permanent groups, but do not cooperate systematically, such as a beehive. These spiders in the Ouliborid family do not have poison glands. So the Philopanella republicana belongs to the Ouliborid family, and none of them develop glands to produce poison, which spiders will use to stun their prey. So the only method they have of subduing their prey is to wrap them entirely, which is a lot of which is very energetically costly. So working together to subdue the prey alleviates some of the energetic cost of hunting. This is a unique behavior because in all other regards, the spiders remain territorial and individualistic because they're innately a solitary animal, and that have the behavior of working communally under certain conditions to maximize their survival. Cooperative breeding and social behavior is rare in spiders, as I mentioned, and it's only found in about 20 to 30 species. However, acting socially has arisen in several spider families or families of spider species independently from the rest of their species, which is typically associated with inbreeding and has been considered an evolutionary dead end, which would explain why this is so rare for spiders to do. To prove that this behavior in spiders is evolutionary transient, mitochondrial DNA testing was performed on one social species, the Stegodiphyus dumicola, and after genetic testing, the individuals showed constant phylogenetic branching, and the hypothesis that this species was evolutionary transient was not supported, which means, and I liked how the Johannesson article said it, that the arachnid species was either caught in sociality or they have evolved into a cryptic species.
Another example of genetic arachnid behavior is timidness and boldness. While many facets of spider personality have been observed and studied, very little is known about how individual personality traits relate to a spider's genes. Certain behavioral traits like prey preference, locomotion, and web formation are generated through epigenetic processes, but observations that hint at heritable personality indicate that genetic variation is present within the traits of boldness and timidness specifically. A research project focused on spiders in the genus Anolosimus was conducted to look for genetic variation directly associated with boldness, timidness, and social structure. Spiders within the genus Anolosimus display a large range of social strategies from communal, subsocial to solitary, with a range stretching from the northern US, where most communal species are found, to the Andes Mountains. Social species are more likely to be found in large populations, and individual personality seems to have no bearing on colony structure, meaning that both timid and bold individuals can coexist in a single colony. Additionally, depending on the ecosystem, the ratio of personality types within a colony is a major determinant of colony success, with different environments having different ratios of bold to timid individuals. To perform a genome-wide analysis, 226 individual A studiosis from both single and multi-female colonies and solitary nests within 4 different populations in Tennessee were sampled. DNA was extracted and a linkage map was created to identify any linked genes that code for behavioral alleles. A short 1200 base pair genomic scaffold was identified in the species that holds 7 single SNPs directly associated with boldness. And while there's no specific loci relating to social organization, it has been observed that social spiders are more likely to mate with similarly tempered individuals, which is really cool because it's an example of direct genetic expression affecting spider behavior and personal preference. Moreover, partly due to temperament preferences when mating, there is a low overall ratio of heterozygous individuals in colonies. It's also suggested that heterozygote individuals are rare because they are less effective at dealing with predators than homozygotes. Using a single representative SNP that was most correlated with boldness, it was found that homozygotes for the alternative allele timidness have longest death feign, heterozygotes are somewhere in the middle, and those with the shortest death feign in response to predators are those with the targeted boldness alleles. Since heterozygotes don't decide to exclusively pick a fight or hide, overall they have lower successful prey capture rates and lower survival rates. Even though that's the case, it has been observed that they experience more mating events in species with mating preference, since heterozygotes have a greater ability to switch between timidness and boldness to mimic potential mates.
Okay, and then our last example of a genetically inherited arachnid behavior is different web building strategies. So some spiders, such as the bolus spider, will weave and swing a silk ball at a flying prey, such as a moth. Others, such as Diopus, that's shown in the picture on the left, the 2 left pictures, will construct a net-like web disproportionately small for the size of the spider and hold it between their 2 front limbs and hold it in the air to catch flying prey. Each catch must require a new web, indicating that this is a highly specialized hunting technique. The Diopus spider is a descendant of the previously mentioned Philoponella family of spiders belonging to the Oliboridae, where I mentioned socially behaving spiders have been found. These behaviors can be described as a response to their environment, as most species are seen as soloistic. However, we continue to see these outlier families that will behave communally, and ancestors have evolved to genetically inherit specialized behavior. Note that the net cast, and we're noting that the net casting spiders are derived from a socially behaving family, but net casting spiders themselves are soloistic. At some point, their highly specialized hunting technique became genetically inherited because they're S strategist species and they mature independently from their parents, as we already mentioned.
So the genomic sequence data pulled from the A studiosus species was also used to perform an association study looking at the different genotypes of boldness and timidness. And they found presence of homozygous and heterozygous alleles in all 4 of the sample populations, despite rarity of the alternative timidness allele. As you can see in the picture, there's a lot more bold spiders than there are timid and mixed. 5 distinct marked genotypes were discovered, with the majority of individuals being homozygous for boldness at all 7 of the linked SNPs, with the 4 other genotypes either having a mix of heterozygous and homozygous alleles or completely homozygous alternate or completely timid. The study also found that there are two major haplotypes, timid and bold, on the gene scaffold, but recombination does occur and leads to less likely favorable genotypes.
Okay, and then why would they do this? Why would they pass down these behaviors? Mostly to maximize resources. Like that's associated with working communally, places where resources are scarce, or in the case of the orb weaving spiders, they lack the gland necessary to produce the poison to paralyze their prey. So this requires them to spin those webs to subdue and work manually. And working manually is a lot of effort. So working together can decrease the amount of work each individual does and maximize the amount of nutrition they gain from the hunting experience. This is an example of adaptive evolution. Those spiders are soloistic in those certain families where it's applicable to work communally, like that behavior will get passed down where it increases their chances of survival. In some species, like an entirely different example would be some species, the male insists on the female eating him post mating, and that would be kind of a weird behavior to inherit. However, it's been shown that the female will need to reach a certain amount of like food intake or nutrient to be able to fertilize and grow and develop larvae, and consuming the male post mating will increase his chance of his genes being passed down to the next generation. And then we also have this cool picture on the right of this mating dance, and that's a peacock spider. And then that's on the left, that's a black widow eating her mate.
Well, why do we care to learn about animal behavior? Specifically when looking at spiders, it helps us to have better conservation methods if we better understand how different spider species interact with their environments. We can come up with better solutions of how to protect them and keep them from dying off. It also leads to a greater overall understanding of personality, heritability in other animals. We can look at things like canines detecting explosives, also understanding pollinator syndromes for agricultural and conservatory purposes. Additionally, pest control, kind of like with spiders, if we better understand how different pest species respond to the environments we create for them, we can better control them. Okay, now we just wanted to give our thoughts on all of the research we did and all of the really cool information we found. I'm really excited by the interest in genetic research in species that most people deem unpleasant, like spiders and other arachnids. It's really refreshing to see these animals given the credit they deserve. It makes me hopeful that more additional research into individual personality and heritable traits will kind of work to humanize species like this that aren't generally viewed as charismatic, and might help people to view these animals through a more appreciative lens. And as Earth's ecosystem changes due to human interaction, these changes require further human intervention to counteract or mitigate this negative change. And I think it's important to be all-encompassing and find importance in every organism's ecological role and inherent worth. So seeing projects like the ones we were looking at that focus on complex systems like gene expression and personality inheritance make me excited to see how framing of traditionally non-charismatic organisms can change in a positive direction. Additionally, a lot of small animals like insects and rodents have SNPs or genome scaffolds that are very similar to the SNPs related to behavior found in arachnids. And this is just a good bridge to help future animal research establish baselines and lead to a better understanding of genetically influenced behavior as a whole.
Yeah, and then it's also important to, when looking at species like this, to take a more genetic and scientific approach to understand their behavior, opposed to anthropomorphizing them as we have in the past, because we've just sort of seen that that has not allowed us to reach a full potential of conservation methods like in comparison to if we actually observe the behavior of the animals for how they are. And then another point is just how like ancient these species are and how their genes that get passed down are extremely evolved, and some of their behaviors are so streamlined at this point, like their web building. And just taking note of that, we could apply it to our own kind of society and have like really high functioning processes if we listen to these animals.
Well, we're excited. Super exciting. The end. Thanks for listening, y'all.